Green
This conference
USA's
will now be recorded.
Green Bag Lunch with the topic of Micron. And it's a fascinating topic. I attended the uh, town hall meeting on Tuesday night at Henniger High School, and there was a big crowd there and a fascinating presentation. And I got to see two Micron representatives in real time, and they were. It was a pleasure to hear what they had to say, and uh, looking forward to what seems to me the biggest change in central New York, if not New York State, in many, many years. I'm looking forward to our speaker today to talk about that. To tell you a little bit about Greening USA and which is an all-volunteer organization promoting sustainability. I'd like to turn it over for a second to Jeff Anthony, who is our membership chair.
Good morning, afternoon now. This is Jeff Anthony. Everyone can hear me, correct?
Yep.
Okay, great. I just wanted to reiterate and build upon what John just said. We are a nonprofit organization run by volunteers that promotes sustainability. If you like the topics that we bring monthly, we encourage you to become a member. You can go out to our website, which is currently under development, but I'm being told can still accept memberships. Become a member. Besides the value of this monthly topics, we do a digest that comes out via email, and we have quite a diverse range of topics there. So that's all I wanted to say. Just encourage anyone, if you like what we bring, please support us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. And Diane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I guess what I would add to that is that people are our most important resource. So becoming a member is great when you financially support the small expenses that we have for this organization. But even more important is members who participate. So if you're interested in an organization that has a real passion for sustainability and making lives better for people of central, upstate New York and ultimately the USA, we would love to have you join us as a committee member, as a board member, and thank you for attending our conference today.
Thanks, Diane. And so now I'll turn it over to Peter Arsenault, who's an architect originally from Central New York, but now residing other places in the country. And Peter is one of our original board members, our founding board members. I guess what it was like 2003 or 2004. And Peter has organized this program and will serve as our moderator today. So Peter, it's yours.
Thank you, John and Diane. Well, welcome everybody. We're delighted to have Rob Simpson joining us today from the CenterState Corporation for Economic Opportunity. Just by way of introduction, maybe a few things you may or may not already know about Rob. He's a 1997 graduate from Colgate University. He's earned a master's degree in public administration from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. And has worked for some notable organizations that are known nationally, like the Defenders of Wildlife in Washington, D.C. He served as policy director for the State Environmental Resource Center in Madison, Wisconsin, and he served as assistant legislative director for the office of John D. Rockefeller IV at the U.S. Senate. Rob moved back to Syracuse in the early 2000s, I think, and joined an organization called the Metropolitan Development Association, the MDA, where he and I worked together for a while. I moved on, but Rob stayed, and he got noticed because the board of directors appointed him as the president of the MDA. And under his leadership, he initiated some discussions with what was known then as the Greater Syracuse Chamber of Commerce, and worked to successfully bring the two organizations together in what is known now as CenterState, or CEO, as you see the logo on the screen. For the past 15 years or more, Rob and CenterState have been at the forefront of creating a sustainable central New York region. Through collaborations with the local, state, and federal governments, other economic development organizations, and regional authorities, many of which Rob holds seats at the table on, CenterState played a pivotal role in attracting Micron to the region. The effort was so complete that it led Micron to publicly proclaim that Central New York showed them the best location in the United States to locate their facility. That's something that has made national news and we've heard international news as well. So we've invited Rob here today to talk about the sustainability impacts that Micron is expected to have on the Central New York community, and he's enthusiastically accepted. He'll address how this significant project affects the economic sustainability of the region for sure, but also some of the important social and environmental aspects of this sustainable development. So at the end of this talk, we'll take questions, but because of the number of people and we anticipate a number of questions, we ask that you simply use the chat box as we go along to type in a succinct question. We'll kind of review them and try to moderate them at the end, and we hope to get to as many as possible. But right now, if you would please give a warm reception and a welcome to Rob Simpson of CenterState Corporation for Economic Opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks to all of you for inviting me to speak today about this exciting project, and appreciate the introduction, Peter. A little bit of background about me. Maybe the more important piece of my bio is that I'm an upstate New York native. I grew up, actually, by the time I came around, I grew up in the Utica area. That was home for me most of my young adult life. Went to Colgate University and then down to DC for 7 years before getting smart and frankly, getting out of Washington, which I am grateful every day that I did, and getting back to Central New York in a role where I've been able to make a really rewarding and satisfying impact on the trajectory of our community, working with great colleagues like Peter, Dave Mankiewicz, who I know is on the line, partners like David Botar, who I think I also see here, and others, trying to set a new trajectory for this region and help us dig out of an economic trajectory that had really had economic, social, demographic forces pulling against our region for a very long time. My grandfather used to work here in Syracuse. My dad grew up here for the first 10 years of his life. My grandfather used to work out at GE when there were 22,000 people out there in Electronics Park. And so the Syracuse and the upstate New York story is one that I'm very personally familiar with. And I think a big piece of the reason why I got engaged in economic development in upstate was my own experience as a high school senior over in the Utica area when Griffiths Air Force Base shut down back in the mid 90s, and 5,000 people and their families and all the businesses that were there to support that base exited that region in what was a catastrophic economic blow for the Mohawk Valley.
All right, I'm going to go listen to something about Micron.
Okay. It really is fun and a privilege. It has been almost 20 years since I've been back in Central New York. And during that period of time, I've had a front row seat to a lot of the change and transformation that we've been driving at as a community. First, driven by a lot of collaborative community efforts, partnerships to revitalize the Central Business District. And I want to give Dave Mankiewicz and other colleagues a lot of credit for having the vision of really moving our Central Business District in a direction that was more of a 24/7 neighborhood than a standard 9-to-5 Central Business District as it was in the 80s and 90s. And that has led to a level of energy and vitality in the center of our city that is palpable. It's something that our businesses take note of. We've seen a wave of investment moving back into our center city. And as a result, recruiting talent from other parts of the world that used to be so challenging and problematic is now actually something we do really well. And in fact, one of the statistics that we shared with Micron in the recruitment process was the fact that 73% of all the in-migrants to Central New York over the course of the last few years are millennials, 25 to 34, the most sought after demographic in the world of economic development because they're in their prime earning years. They're having families, they're buying homes, putting people into our school systems. And that has been a sea change, an absolute sea change from when I returned back in 2003. And the only thing that we heard about that the community was talking about was the brain drain, how young people were leaving our community. And now we are growing our millennial population at the third fastest rate of any city in America. Pretty remarkable accomplishment in a relatively short period of time. So we're here to talk about Micron, and obviously, I know we're going to have time for questions. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of information. There's been a lot of articles written. I'll summarize as best I can a few of the top line elements associated with this project, and then hopefully we can open it up and have a discussion. But it will not be a surprise to any of you given the reporting that's happened already, to think about the full scale and magnitude of this impact. As the slide shows, during the course of the recruitment process with Micron, there was a really robust number of economic impact analyses that we worked with New York State to commission, and understanding, what not only the direct impact from Micron might be, but the full scale of the potential supply chain impact for this project. And the idea that a single project could materialize into 50,000 new permanent jobs over the course of the next 20 to 30 years is almost mind-boggling. I mean, for years and years and years in the world of economic development, we have been, we've been working on projects, all of us that do this work, that are about helping companies create 10 jobs, maybe 50 jobs, every once in a while, a couple hundred, right? First project that we had a chance to work on that rose to the scale of more than that was the Amazon project a couple of years ago, which was the largest capital investment in Onondaga County's recent history, $400 million. And that project has now created over 2,500 full-time jobs and full-time equivalents at their facility up there in Liverpool. It's remarkable to see how quickly that transformation has taken root. And now that we're at a point where we're talking about direct investments by Micron of $100 billion over the next 20 years, 9,000 direct jobs, which will result in, the average salary over $100,000, and a huge number of supply chain jobs, contractors, not to mention the construction workforce that will go along with building these mega fabs, which are astronomically large facilities, 150 to 170 foot tall buildings with multiple floors, and hundreds of thousands of square feet, actually 600,000 square feet per fab of the highest end clean room space you can imagine. When all said and done, 40 football fields of clean room space will be on that White Pine site out in Clay. It will be the largest single clean room in the United States of America and one of the largest in the world. And that's all happening right here in our region, which is just a remarkably exciting thing to be able to say and talk to you all about.
I think that's all I need. Thanks.
We have, as you can see, the impacts here on this project are pretty significant as it relates to impacts on our regional GDP. Just to put it in perspective, our region's GDP is about $42 billion a year. And so the annual impact from the Micron project has the potential to be equivalent to almost 25% of our current regional GDP. And that's an impact that will be felt year after year after year. To put it in slightly different terms, the Amazon project that we mentioned before was previously one of the largest we'd worked on. It was a $400 million project. This project is 250 times bigger in terms of capital investment than that Amazon project, which is just stunning in its scale. And with that kind of scale is going to come a huge amount of impact on our community. A lot of positive impact as a place that has been hungry for jobs and economic development and economic mobility for decades. This represents a really once in a lifetime opportunity for us to move our community forward in terms of our average wage, in terms of our poverty rates, in terms of lifting people up and providing career pathways for those who've been historically left behind. It also comes with a huge number of challenges, logistical and otherwise. We're going to need to manage thoughtfully in order to ensure that an investment of the scale of Micron's investment in our region doesn't change the character of our region in ways that the residents here don't want. So very conscious of the fact that this kind of project is going to come with massive population growth. It's going to come with transportation impacts, environmental impacts, green space impacts, and so much more. And we'll have a chance, hopefully, during the course of the discussion today to talk about that. But before I talk more about some of the economic and social and sustainability impacts, I want to just articulate something that I think is the most important takeaway from this entire process. I've been doing some version of this job for 20 years in and around Syracuse and Central New York. And during that period of time, I've had the privilege and sometimes the not so privilege of watching our community both pull together and pull itself apart from a lack of leadership and collaboration. And I can tell you unequivocally that the level of collaboration and teamwork that went into courting Micron, putting a site together, putting incentive packages together, communicating the value of our community, selling them on our workforce and our quality of life is unlike anything I've ever experienced at any point in my professional career, and certainly during my time here in Central New York. Our county executive did a phenomenal job, took a lot of criticism assembling a site in Clay, New York that for many, many years, for decades in fact, sat vacant and underutilized and was almost a punchline in various community jokes around government boondoggles and wasted spending. I see my friend David Botar on the line here today. David, for years and years and years, for as long as I've known him, has been championing this site as a potential site for semiconductor manufacturing because of its unique power and water assets. And the reality is that there was not the political will to do what was necessary to turn this site into a world-class location for semiconductor manufacturing until County Executive McMahon took office. The site wasn't big enough. The infrastructure wasn't ready. Frankly, our community wasn't ready for an investment of this scale either. But there's a lot of credit that goes to the county for preparing this site and putting us at a point where we could be in the game for a project like this. I think a lot of credit also goes to all of you and those in our community businesses that have stayed here, invested even when times were tough. The groundwork that we laid over the last 15, 20, 30 years in terms of revitalizing our city, building university industry and community connections, workforce development initiatives, rebuilding our innovation ecosystem, those initiatives are a huge part of why Micron was in a position to select Central, because they saw the energy, the vitality in the community working together to change its economic trajectory. That was something they told us unequivocally that they felt and they believed in, and was a central reason for them selecting this region. And then, of course, our partners at the state and federal level, absent the federal incentives in the CHIPS Act, this project that Micron's doing doesn't happen in the United States. It happens in Singapore. That I can tell you unequivocally. And absent the incentives that New York State was able to put on the table, this project doesn't happen in New York. It happens most likely in a state below the Mason-Dixon line, where the cost of labor and construction and the cost of doing business are simply lower. The memory business, which Micron is in, is a commoditized business, and scale and the reducing the cost of the production of each bit that goes on their chips is a key part of their business model. And we needed to be able to deliver to them cost-effective solutions, not only that provided them with the workforce and the quality of life that they need and that they want, but that also enabled them to succeed in a highly competitive memory market. Next slide, please. Dan, can you flip to the next slide? Yep, there we go. So I mentioned a little bit about this, sort of the context. I think there obviously is a lot of discussion and conversation around the parallel investment that Intel is making over in the Columbus region. That's actually a project that we had an opportunity to compete for as well here in Central New York. In fact, we were the runner-up location for that site. It was a very difficult thing to have spent working with the county, better part of a year courting Intel for our site in White Pine, only to have them choose the Columbus area. Although in retrospect, I'm very grateful they did. I think it's a good location for them with some really strong university partnerships. And frankly, I think it's worked out really well for us because not only did we land the larger investment, but I also think we found a better corporate partner that fits our community's values. And you'll hear me talk about this a couple of times throughout the course of this conversation, but from our very first meeting with Micron executives back in September of 2021, it was very clear that this is a company that shares the values that our leaders here in Central New York also share around climate and sustainability, about economic mobility and economic opportunity, around innovation and entrepreneurship, and around our belief in the opportunity to rebuild what had historically become known as the Rust Belt or the industrial heartland of the United States. And I find it notable that the two largest fab projects that are occurring as part of this wave of reshoring are happening in the industrial heartland. They're happening in Ohio and New York. And yes, there are projects that are happening down in Texas as well, which has become a hotbed for semiconductor activity. But I think as many of the other fab projects come online during the course of the next 6 months, 9 months, and are announced, you're going to see more projects east of the Mississippi than most people would have predicted 5 years ago. And I think this is an indicator of a long-term trend that I expect will mean the reshoring of more manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing jobs, to places like Syracuse and upstate New York. I think this is a trend we can capitalize on. There's a lot of things driving it, from global geopolitical factors. Certainly COVID encouraged the tightening and the shortening of supply chains from a resiliency standpoint. But I also think increasingly we are going to see a movement back to the Northeast for manufacturing jobs that is driven by climate migration, both for companies and people, as well as the availability and or scarcity associated with water, which clearly for the semiconductor industry is a hyper-intensive water user. So these are all opportunities that the Micron project to me has exposed for our region in the future. There are also challenges that we're going to have to be thoughtful about and manage. Even though we have so much fresh water here in our backyard, it is not an inexhaustible supply. And the protection of the quality of that water and other ancillary assets are supremely important to our long-term sustainability as a region. Next slide, please. One important thing, just a little bit about Micron and who they are. They have facilities all over the world. I won't read the list. You can see them, but they are an American-based company. The two primary competitors for Micron in the memory market, there are really only three major players that combined have 97% market share in the memory business, and it's Micron, who's based in Boise, Idaho, and Samsung and SK Hynix, both of which are headquartered in South Korea. Excuse me. So we're very fortunate that helping to lead the wave of this American reshoring, we actually have an American company with deep roots and ties and a real strong corporate interest in seeing U.S. advanced manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing succeed here in the United States. And this is going to be a long-term partnership that has the potential to really transform our high-tech industry here in the United States, and as well continue to improve our, or I should say, improve our reliance on foreign-made chips for things that have now become a critical part of our life, right? Whether it's our smartphones, our coffee machines, our microwaves, our dishwashers, almost our vehicles, almost every element of our life is now governed in some way or depends on chips. And right now, our chip supply chain in the United States has been severely constrained. A huge amount, I think only 12% total capacity of the semiconductor industry is made here in the United States. And that share has decreased significantly over the course of the last 30 years. So this wave of reshoring that has been enabled by the Federal CHIPS Act is going to help turn that equation on its head, bring more of that critical supply chain here, and create more opportunities for communities like Syracuse to grow and to thrive. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of sense of who they are, I mean, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this company is how innovative they are. over 50,000 patents that they have received over the course of the last 40 to 50 years that they've been operating, and that number continues to grow exponentially every year. This is a very innovative company that has succeeded in the memory business in the United States when no other company in the memory business over the last 50 years was successful at doing this in the United States. And the way they did that was not by driving to the lowest cost locations, but they did it through innovation, which frankly, from my perspective, is a far more sustainable way to build and grow a company and makes them a much better partner for us, especially as we think about the potential academic partnerships with Syracuse University, Cornell, Clarkson, RIT, RPI, and the list goes on. This is going to be a great opportunity for us as a region. Next slide, please. In addition to the headline, right? The headline is Micron picks Central New York, Micron to invest $100 billion, Micron to create 9,000 direct jobs, Micron's project will result in 50,000 jobs, right? Those headlines are massive in their own right. But one of the things that I am extremely proud of is the fact that along with this project, we negotiated, the New York team that was working with Micron, which consisted of ourselves at CenterState, Onondaga County, the governor's office in the state of New York, and Senator Schumer's team. We negotiated the single largest community investment framework in the history of the world, as best we can tell. I know that sounds like a crazy statement to make, but the reality is we have been looking now for the better part of a year for examples of companies that have made large-scale commitments to community, putting real dollars and real goals attached to community benefits. And the examples at scale are actually fewer than you might anticipate. We're very fortunate that we identified early on that Micron was a company that we could have that conversation with in a way that was not confrontational at all, but rather was around trying to find alignment between our community interests and their corporate objectives. And I'm really proud of the fact that we did. This $500 million community investment framework is something that we will be talking about a lot more over the course of the next few weeks. There'll be a couple of additional announcements with more detail about exactly how this is going to function, community engagement, and all sorts of things. But the bottom line is Micron has committed themselves of their corporate capital over the next 20 years, $250 million to this $500 million fund. The state of New York has committed another $100 million. And we will be working with the state, with Micron, with Onondaga County, with all of our partners locally to identify that other $150 million in matching funding that we will want to round out this $500 million community investment. I'm not worried about where that money is going to come from at all. In fact, we've already got a line on significant portions of it from other matching funding programs, conversations with National Philanthropy and others. This is something that hasn't been done before on this scale. I'm really proud of the fact that that we are experimenting with this and we're doing it here in Syracuse. I have been a firm believer for as long as I've been here that the trope that somehow economic growth and community development are inextricably juxtaposed, right? That they are things that can't coexist. I just never believed. I've seen it in my own professional life, and so it's really fun to be a part of an experiment designed to show that growth and community development can happen simultaneously. In fact, it's the best way for it to happen in order to achieve a more sustainable economic future for ourselves, for our children, and for all the folks who live here. This fund is going to be targeted at 4 key areas of community need that we anticipate will be critical both to Micron's success and to our ability as a community to maximize the return on this historic investment that Micron is making. What are those 4 categories? Education, workforce development, relatively self-explanatory, housing, which we know is going to be a critical need. Any place that there has been the level of growth that we're talking about that'll be associated with this Micron investment, we know that housing appreciation is a significant challenge. that not only the amount and availability of housing, but the affordability of housing, the impacts it has on the most housing vulnerable. Like, this is something that we identified early in our courtship with Micron. We would need to be paying careful attention to. And I'm really proud of the fact that we are making key targeted investments in that. And then the fourth bucket is really around community amenities. You've already seen some investments that Micron has made, investments in the MOST, investments in the YMCA, and there'll be more projects like that that will be needed, so that as we evolve and grow, and as our population grows here as a community, that we're able to provide individuals and families with the kinds of offerings that a rapidly growing community will need in order to be attractive from a workforce standpoint. So I'm particularly proud of the role that we played organizationally. Our fingerprints are all over this plan, which also means our fingerprints will be all over how it operates and whether it works the way it has been intended. But I will say that Micron themselves have been an active, a willing, and an eager partner in this experiment, which I think positions us really well for the future. Next slide, please. We talk about some of the goals and real tangible commitments, and these commitments are mind-boggling. 30% of the eligible construction spend, right? Think about that for a second. So there's $100 billion in capital investment Micron will make. About 33 to 34 billion of that is in hard construction costs associated with the development of the 4 fabs. Another 65 or so million is mostly in the tooling that Micron will be buying to install in those facilities out in Clay. 30% of 33 billion. You're looking at over a $10 billion spend that they are committing as a set aside to doing business with socioeconomically disadvantaged businesses and individuals. That's women-owned businesses, it's minority-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, rural businesses, small businesses are going to have a remarkable opportunity to participate in the wealth creation and generation that is going to be the result from this project. Our job as a community is going to be to help build the capacity of those businesses to participate in this economic bonanza that is available in front of them. And that is going to take a lot of work. Our regional ecosystem can't come close to completing that $10 billion spend today. We can't touch it, right? The good news is the construction won't start for a couple of years. We have time to build capacity of some of our regional businesses to be critical suppliers to Micron, and we'll have the next 20 years to work alongside them, build that capacity, and to capture more and more of that spend. But it's going to take intentionality. It's going to take effort from organizations like CenterState, from our local governments, from our state governments, from organizations like yours, to ensure that we're empowering companies to participate in this. Not only has Micron committed to set-asides on their construction activity, but they've done something that almost no other company has ever done, even in any other community benefits agreement anywhere in the country. And that is that they've made a commitment to 20% of their annual eligible operating spend, right? So think about their operating spend as the money they're putting into payroll and to janitorial services and landscaping and all the other things that go along with keeping the fab running throughout the course of the year. All told, over 20 years, that's another $4 to $5 billion in set-aside spend that is going to be made available to these socioeconomically disadvantaged businesses, creating almost $15 billion in total available market potential for that section of the business community that we're talking about. So when we talk at a leadership level around our goal of creating generational wealth for those who've been historically left behind, this is probably the single largest opportunity we will ever have to meaningfully drive dollars and investment and spend and revenue into those businesses. And to put it in perspective, the Interstate 81 project, which is the other massive project going on here in our region, will be a $2.3 billion project, maybe 2.4 when all is said and done. It will have its own set-asides. but the order of magnitude is so dramatically different. And that's not to minimize what's happening with 81. It is a massive project in its own right. But I just want to drive home just how profound that opportunity is to create wealth for individuals and businesses that have historically been excluded from the most dynamic parts of our economy. They've also struck a project labor agreement with our building trades, which is unique. We think it is one of the largest, if not the largest, project labor agreement in the history of the country. And they are making real and they're making real commitments to hiring goals as well, working to hire from within our community, working to hire people from historically marginalized backgrounds, and we'll be rolling out more of those commitments here in the not too distant future. Next slide, please. Just a couple more things that are a part of this. I think as part of the rollout, when the president was here, you saw some commitments, sponsorships at the most, commitment to partner with our new regional STEAM school that the city and the county have done such a great job at shepherding at the old Greystone building right in downtown Syracuse. Partnerships with OCC and Syracuse University. Yeah, I get asked a lot about whether or not this project is real. Is it happening? Hey, I'm watching Micron stock price. It's in the tank. Hey, I saw they just laid 10% of their workforce. Should we be worried? And the reality is companies that are spending, tens of millions of dollars to build long-term
I
partnerships
put it on here because I couldn't figure out how
aren't
to log in on my computer. So Mike Miller has sent Shereen and I the phone number.
companies that are making those kinds of investments aren't thinking about pulling out of our community. In fact, we're watching them accelerate the pace of the partnerships that they're working to develop. We had their executives in town the first 3 days of this week and spent 2 full days working with them with academic and workforce development partners on building job training pipelines for people who live in our community and come to our institutions of higher education. And that's remarkable. Those are long lead time items. The company's not going to start hiring for these jobs until 2025, 26. So the fact that they are investing so much time and energy in building these partnerships today is a very strong indication of the fact that they are not pulling back. And I'll speak to that in just a little bit longer because I'm sure there'll be more questions. Next slide, please. Something I know all of you will care about. In addition to, let me step back. One thing that we did that was critically important in this process in recruiting Micron was that we needed to change state law to create a new incentive program that would allow us to land an investment on the order of magnitude of Micron. The reality is no economic development program in the history of the country ever anticipated a $100 billion industrial investment. And there simply wasn't enough resources and capital in the state's existing economic development programs to accommodate a project of this scale. But what's beautiful and artful about what Governor Hochul proposed and what we were ultimately able to work with the legislature to approve, Senator Mannion, Assemblyman Sturpey, phenomenal partners in that process, is that the Green Ships program, as it's known, which was the new program that was stood up, came with some requirements. One was any company receiving Green Ships investment from the state was going to need to make community benefits commitments like I just spoke about. It also came with a requirement that those companies would need to make massive sustainability commitments. And I am really proud of the fact that the fabs that Micron will build will be the greenest fabs anywhere in the world. They've committed to building all 4 of their fabs at a minimum of LEED Gold standard, which is very difficult to do in large-scale industrial projects, as many of you know. They're going to try and they will strive to achieve LEED Platinum if they can. And we don't need to go into it all today, and some of you probably know way more about it than I do. They may or may not achieve that objective, but they are going to strive to achieve LEED Platinum for their fabs. But at a minimum, they've committed to LEED Gold. They've also made major commitments to greenhouse gas emissions, to wastewater recycling, and the company has a goal of having all of their facilities powered by renewable energy by 2030. which aligns very well with New York State's very aggressive climate goals, as you all are aware. Next slide, please. A few other of the commitments that were detailed in the memorandum of understanding that was executed between Micron and New York, and that we're in the process of implementing today. Including utilization of green hydrogen where possible, and I think one of the things that was really helpful to us in this recruitment process is New York's commitment to climate sustainability. I will tell you, having done this now for 20 years. Issues around climate change have not often been front and center in our discussions with corporate leaders and corporations in the economic development context. This was very different. The company noted New York State's commitment to climate change and renewable energy. They saw value in those New York State commitments, and they saw alignment between New York State's aggressive goals and their own aggressive goals for ESG purposes that are being driven by their shareholders and in financial performance and expectations. This is a harbinger of things to come. I firmly believe that Micron is at the forefront. They are a far more progressive company than many. There will be more companies that begin to make decisions like this that ultimately I think are going to play to the benefit of upstate New York and New York State as a whole because of the policies that have been set in place by the state. I know that can be a little controversial, and I know I hear sometimes even from folks within my own business community that that they find some of those climate goals to be overly restrictive and difficult for their business. But I can tell you in this case, it was a settling factor, as was the fact that currently today, when you plug your phone charger or your car into a wall outlet to charge, the power that's coming out of that outlet is 92% emissions free, which is the cleanest power of any power grid anywhere in the United States today. And that also made an impact on leaders at Micron who knew that from day one they were already vastly outperforming some of their climate goals by coming to New York than they would be from going to a place like Texas or Arizona or other places that they may have considered. Next slide, please.
That appears to be all that appears to be all the slides I had.
Okay, well then I'm done talking. This is obviously I could do this all day. Our team at CenterState, I just acknowledge for a moment. This is the largest economic development project in the history of New York State, and it is one of, if not the largest economic development projects in the history of the United States of America. And we are a community that for many years has had an inferiority complex that has seen its share of very real economic struggles. But we're also a community that has pulled together over the last couple of decades and set a strategy. We've executed against that strategy. We've built collaboration within our regional leadership. And as a result, we have won the Super Bowl of all economic development projects. And the impact that it will have is going to change lives in this region, largely for the better, for generations to come. That doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen, because we were lucky, and there's obviously some luck in it. It happens because people like the folks who work on our team at CenterState, or who work at Onondaga County, or who work for the state or Senator Schumer's team, literally spend every day of their lives for 15 months doing nothing but trying to solve this problem and make this work. And there's never been a moment where I've been more proud to be doing the work that I do and to be a part of this community, because we now have a chance to lead the world in memory manufacturing. And I'll share with you one last anecdote that to me drives home how important this is, not just for today, but for the future. I was out in California the beginning of January at a semiconductor industry event. And one of the things that was talked about is that the total amount of data that is collected today from your smartphones, from your smartwatch, from your smart thermostat, they call it the global data sphere. The global data sphere is equivalent to, in 2022, end of 22, beginning of 23, 100 zettabytes. I didn't know what a zettabyte was. I looked it up on my phone as I was sitting in the conference room. But a zettabyte is a billion terabytes. So think of the terabyte like external hard drive you get to put your photos and your videos on, a billion of those. That's what it takes to store all of the current global data that's available. And today, that number is 100. 8 years from now, the total global data sphere is projected to be 600 zettabytes. So it's going to grow 6x over the course of the next 8 years. It's exponential growth. And it all depends on high quality, high capacity semiconductor memory chips that are going to be produced in Syracuse, New York by the world leader in memory manufacturing. And they're going to be putting people in Central New York to work in that factory. And the future of our world is of interconnected devices. There's no scenario where we move backwards from that. And so we are now literally at the leading edge of the most critical technology that undergirds the entire future, near term, midterm, probably long term future for our global society. That's what this project is. That's the impact it has the potential to have. And I'm really interested in hearing some of your questions, talking with you, and exploring that a little further.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Rob, very much. A lot of information there to digest. I'm glad you phrased it at the end the way that you did. Before we got on live here, I mentioned that this has been a good news project for over a year. And I think sometimes, especially having lived in Central New York for a long time, sometimes it's hard to accept good news. You know, we tend to be skeptical because we've been burned before. We've seen promises made and promises not kept, and it looks like this is a case where it's really coming through. So congratulations to everybody that worked on it. We have been getting a number of interesting questions in the chat. If you're not familiar with how to use the chat, just up at the top of the screen, you'll see what looks like a little box like you'd see in a cartoon. If you just click on that, you should see all the questions there. We have clearly a few architects and designers in the audience, so maybe we'll start with an easy one. Has the design team been selected yet, the architects and engineers that'll be working on the project?
Of course, you would start with a difficult question for me to answer.
I thought that was going to be easy. Sorry.
No, I mean, so the short answer is yes, but it is not public, and it is not my place to share who that team is. So, but yes, there have been some decisions made. You know, not all of those decisions have been made. Understand that, you know, you've got design, conversations around construction firms and, engineering firms, and like there are still huge numbers of opportunities. In fact, one of the things that we were talking with Micron while they were here this week is they really want to engage with our local vendor community, and so in the very near term, we're going to be working with them, probably partnering with the county and other organizations to put some vendor opportunities together for people to get to know Micron, talk to Micron, and figure out how and where they slot into the massive amount of spend that's coming. So, but some initial conversations around the early design of the project have been made, yes.
Okay, very good. So a few other questions have come up about the what looks to be very impressive goals for the sustainability of the facility itself. And at least one person, Diane I don't see more than the initial for her last name, wants to know if other things beyond LEED were considered. For example, other things like the Green Building Challenge and so forth.
The short answer is yes, and I think what I would this is where I get out of my lane a little bit, so I'll be really clear about that. This is a company who has as a core value the health and well-being of both the environment and their employees, and so I really do believe that they will make all best commercially reasonable efforts to to do everything at their facility to ensure that this is, the most sustainable fab anywhere in the world. The semiconductor industry is an intensive manufacturing industry. It's a heavy industrial use, and there are lots of chemicals and processes that are a result of that. I believe we have the absolute best steward within that industry that's going to be our partner here in the region. And so what more they choose to do above and beyond lead, will be for them to speak to. But I have great confidence that they're going to be great partners, and frankly, that they're going to want to engage with many of you and with our community to understand, what we hope that they might do above and beyond that.
Okay, great. Related to that, we have a few questions about the efficiency of manufacturing. For example, Chris Carrick is asking about the manufacturing process itself, specifically in the use of lower global warming potential etching gases and gases used to clean tools and machinery. It seems that once those things are set up, it's hard to change those gases. And we've got a similar question from Gavin asking about Scope 3 emissions, which are the post-production emissions, for instance. Have those been talked about?
Yeah, yes, I've been in several conversations with the company about Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I know they're thinking about it. I cannot, I can't speak to the details of that, but I know that is part of their calculus and what they are thinking about to ensure. And it's not just Micron. It actually, there was an entire discussion around sustainability at the Semiconductor Industry Association event out in California at the beginning of January, and it was specifically around ensuring that that companies are moving beyond, conversations around Scope 1 and Scope 2 to Scope 3. So I think it's a great call out and something I'm sure we'll have more discussion with them about.
Okay. Some of the other things that you mentioned were the renewable electricity. Is that on site, or is it primarily hydropower that we already have access to? I know the National Grid has a major substation right there that I presume is fed mostly by the falls.
Yeah, the substation is fed primarily from hydro coming from the west, and certainly nuclear emissions coming down from the north from Oswego. I think that one of the advantages to the White Pine site was the redundant power inputs, really critical to their business continuity process, and we're one of the only sites in the country that could offer them that redundant feed. Especially of low emissions power. The reality is that in the short term, I suspect that for their additional construction phase power needs, the company will probably be utilizing renewable energy credits. I know that they are having conversations around things like geothermal and other on-site utilization. I don't think decisions have been made. But the power load for a facility like this is not something that could be generated on site, period, full stop. And so it will require the addition of additional renewable energy capacity throughout upstate New York, which is already part of New York's aggressive climate plans. And I think that, again, going back to the point, like the company saw New York's aggressive renewable energy goals as being aligned with their corporate business interests, which was something I think that was really impactful in the selection process. How exactly, where they're going to get the specific power from, those decisions are still ongoing, but they do have a commitment to having this facility fully, to having the power at the facility from renewable sources, 100%.
Okay, very good. I guess related to that, Don Hughes is wondering about the significant acreage of wetlands on the White Pine site, and how will those be mitigated, or is it too early to know, or is that still under design?
Under conversations, I would defer to Onondaga County here. They're leading the secret process and working with the Army Corps and others as it relates to mitigation of any of the potential sort of lower level wetlands that are out there. Obviously, it was a significant piece of conversation to ensure that that would not be a fatal flaw with the site. And I think everyone, not only on our team, but the Micron team, is convinced that it would not be. I'm sure there'll be extensive further discussions around that, but the county would be the right place for more detail on that.
Okay, very good. All right, why don't we switch over to some of the other aspects that you mentioned. You talked about the amount of spending going to minority and veteran-owned and so forth. I'm presuming those are target minimums. Is that correct? Some are wondering, does
Yeah,
that mean that?
that's correct. Yeah, I saw Gavin's comment. No, it doesn't mean that 70 or 80% will be awarded to white male-owned, non-disabled veteran businesses. Those are targets, though, and frankly, those targets are as aggressive as any targets in the country. And so I think the reality is that, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, we are going to need to invest heavily in the capacity of our socioeconomically disadvantaged business enterprises in our region in order to capture that spend. They're probably, especially when you think about some of the specialty classifications associated with the spend, like these are aggressive targets, and the company needs to have their facility built. They need to have it built on time. They need to be producing chips when that global demand is ramping up and accelerating. And so we have to help them achieve these goals. That's, I think, part of the responsibility we feel at CenterState. I know the state and county and city will also have critical roles to play in helping us to build that capacity. This has to be a focus for us as a region. I mean, it certainly has been a focus for us, but now there's a major market driver that is really creating some deadlines for us to continue to build that capacity. This is all hands on deck in this category from my perspective.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, for a lot of years, I practiced architecture in Syracuse, and we had MBE goals for construction, and it was very difficult, and they were lower than 30%. And it was difficult to reach those because we just couldn't find the qualified contractors to fill the need. So that's great to hear that there's a move to boost the availability within the region.
And Micron themselves has a lot of programming internal to the company that they've used, elsewhere in Boise and Manassas, Virginia, where they have a facility, and around the world to help bring vendors in and help them, skill up and develop the competencies necessary to be effective members of the Micron supply chain. And so, we expect them to be a big part of the solution set. They're going to have to help themselves, but we are also going to have to help them.
We had a question about outreach in general, and I would think to companies like this or to people that want to start eligible companies. Is there an outreach program through CenterState or through somebody else?
Yep, there is both. Actually, the day that the Micron announcement rolled out, we had a page up on our website available to do intake for companies in Central New York that want to do business with Micron. I believe it's CenterStateCEO.com/Micron. Micron now has set up their own intake process, which is great. I think it's micron.com/ny. And a whole lot of information, facts, details about the project, but also FAQs and information about how people can get into their procurement system.
Excellent.
And we're as an organization, obviously we're always available, and many of the folks on this call are members of ours, and we're available to help handhold businesses that are looking to get through that process. People can always just reach out to me directly, and I'll get you connected to the people you need.
Perfect. That's great. All right. Some of the other questions kind of related to the surrounding area. For example, Steve Lynch is asking if there are stakeholders developing shovel-ready sites for tiered suppliers to Micron. Can you speak to the driving distances and site sizes that are likely to be favored for suppliers to Micron, or is that hard to pin down?
I can try. We are just starting to. I'll share a couple of things. At one point during the recruitment process, it was January of 22. We were out in San Jose with their executive leadership. We'd had a full day of meetings, and at the end of that set of meetings, we were still in sales mode. We didn't know at that time that we had this deal. We felt great about it. We felt like it was moving in a positive direction, but we were still selling them and answering really hard questions that they were asking us. And at the end of that session, you never quite know how your pitch is received. The team on the other side of the table sort of started looking at each other, and it was clear that there was something that they were thinking about but not saying. And finally, the lead site selector who worked for Deloitte kind of nodded his head, and one of the Micron team members said, "Hey, listen, this was great. This was super responsive. Like, we want to continue this discussion. But one of the things that, we have some further questions about is your ability to accommodate our supply chain." And which is a fair question. We hadn't talked a lot about their supply chain at that point. And what they shared with us in that moment was that, that their supply chain ecosystem that gets built out over 20 years could ultimately be 200 additional companies that come along with them. No guarantee that it would be, but it could be, right? That's what they've seen in other places when major investments like this have been made. And that's a massive number. So it was a little terrifying, also wildly exciting. And we spent the next 72 hours working with the county on a supply chain strategy to identify available real estate, municipally owned sites, private owned sites, existing sites with existing infrastructure. And we're still doing a lot of that work. And I want to give credit to my colleague, Dave Botar. He's been one of our best partners on all things infrastructure and site development related in Central New York during my entire career. We're working with him right now on some site inventories. Obviously, Steve, we've got conversations going with all of our county partners. There will be opportunities for supply chain companies throughout this region and beyond across upstate New York. That's how big of a footprint the supply chain web is going to have throughout Central New York. And it's so exciting to be able to think about projects that can have an impact, not just here in Onondaga County, but in Cayuga, Oswego, Cortland, Madison, and beyond. I think there'll be another fab project, hopefully, that lands over in the Utica area at the Marcy Nano campus, which will just create even more momentum for some of these supply chains that could service Global Foundries and Wolfspeed and whatever else they land, and Micron. And you can start to see the semiconductor corridor being built up around the thruway system. And that's remarkable. We don't have details yet on each of the individual suppliers and what their needs are. We are starting conversations just literally over the course of the last week. And we've asked Micron for a lot of information that we're hoping that they're going to be in a position to share with us pretty soon about, who their preferred supply chain partners are, who they really need next to them, who they need across the street, who they need within a half an hour, who they need within an hour. And obviously, as we get that information, Steve and other county partners, we're going to be sharing that and trying to make this a win for all of Central New York.
Super. So they should follow up with your office to find out more about that?
Yeah, anyone who's got questions around supply chain, follow up with us, follow up with Onondaga County. We're working hand in hand with them and also with New York State on these opportunities. And we're already in conversations with Steve and with other county partners around Central New York about how we can coordinate as best we can some of these efforts.
Okay, great. You mentioned transportation, and not surprising, there are a few questions about traffic. At least one person here has pointed out that Bob Padua points out the town of Clay turned down a development recently behind Route 31 commercial area, citing traffic issues. Are the local towns and so forth on board with the transportation aspect of this?
Yeah, I think largely. I mean, listen, the Route 31 corridor is a mess today. And I think one of the things that this project actually enables, there's a significant, multi nine-figure investment in transportation and infrastructure for the site that includes significant enhancements to roadways in and around Route 31, Codnoy Road, up to and including potential enhancements and improvements to the Interstate 81 corridor at some point in the future, should they be merited, or should the research and the EIS process demand it. So there is a lot of money set aside in this deal to make enhancements to improve what is there today and to accommodate the potential future growth associated with it. But I will point out, like, that, there's a lawsuit right now that says, hey, let's not make our 81 decision, let's go back and reconsider Micron, and like, oh my God, like enough already. Just to put it in perspective, and I'm going to borrow my colleague Dave Mankiewicz, who was right to point out, even if every single person working at Micron drove their own vehicle to Micron, and they were all three shifts were there at the same time, you're talking about 9,000 cars on a system that carries more than 110,000 cars a day, north and south through the Central New York region. And the reality is, with three shifts, you're talking about a significantly lower number of vehicles that are going to be going to that site, and at any given moment in any given day. And so, yeah, there'll be enhancements. Those enhancements are not such that we need to reopen a 15-year torturous dialogue around the future of our interstate. We found the right solution. We need to implement that solution as soon as possible, and we need the courts to stop being in the way, from my perspective. Other thing I'll say about transportation, we were very clear with Micron that this project, even though it is not located in the center of the city, needed to accommodate public transportation access. They were eager for that. As part of our community benefits agreement, they committed to building an on-site transportation hub to allow public transportation access to the site. We've been working closely with Centro to ensure that those routes are timed to accommodate the shift schedule. That's going to be critically important. And maybe more importantly, we've also been working with Centro to ensure that there is direct express access from the downtown hub to the site. So why is that important? It's important because if we want to get people from historically marginalized communities, particularly in our city, into employment opportunities at the site, it needs to not take them 3 hours and multiple bus transfers to get out to Clay. And so Centro has committed to running express bus service that is shift timed from the downtown hub direct to Micron's front door, which is huge.
That's excellent news. That's great to hear. That is a historical issue. It's been a barrier to employment for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Related to that are questions about housing, both in terms of is there any potential benefit for housing in downtown areas to be, particularly public housing, to be sure that people in public housing can gain access or benefit.
Yeah, housing is the game now, right? So, in a weird way, and Dave Mankiewicz and I were talking about this a year and a half ago. I remember the first moment where I came home from a meeting with the Micron team, actually feeling like we were going to win this deal, which was over a year and a half ago, right? September of 21. Which seems crazy because we didn't have the deal. We weren't even close to having the deal. We were still one of 15 communities that was in consideration at that point. But there was something about the relationship, the conversation, the values alignment, and what they were telling us they needed to be successful. They were all things I knew that Syracuse and Central New York could deliver, and they were things I knew the state could deliver as well. And I remember coming home from a dinner one night in Albany. They were getting ready to go meet with the governor the next day. And I fired off an email probably at 3 o'clock in the morning to David and to our team. And I said, hey, what, let's assume for a second, I know this is crazy, but let's assume we land this deal. Like, what do we break? Right? What do we break? We break our housing stock. We break our transportation system. We break our electric grid. We break what are the things that we need to be paying attention to today to get out in front of some of the downstream negative economic impacts or socioeconomic impacts or environmental impacts associated with a project of this scale. And David, as David always does, comes up with a remarkably thoughtful 5-page memo of everything that could possibly break as a result of an investment of the scale. And the good news is, we've now had 15 months to think about and plan for. Peter's laughing because he also worked with David.
I know.
He knows exactly the memo that I got, and it is brilliant. And I'll frame it someday. And it's, but we've had 15 months to be, in advance thinking about those things, working with the planning board and the county and other partners in the state on how to try to minimize those impacts and maximize the benefit of investment. Housing is a huge, right at the top of the list. I estimate we'll probably need upwards of 40,000 new units of housing in Onondaga County to accommodate the growth that's going to happen. My number that we've workshopped inside of CenterState is that we'll see 125,000 more people in central New York, in our metro area, within 15 to 20 years. It's a mind-boggling number for a region that spent 70 or 80 years losing population. And we're going to need housing. We're going to need affordable housing. We're going to need all kinds of housing. And so this is a conversation we're deeply involved in, county's deeply involved in. You saw the governor in her state of the state made some pretty aggressive proposals around housing to try to increase the volume of housing that is being built, not just in central New York, but in New York State. And I'll tell you, that proposal had its genesis in some of the housing challenges that we know will be exacerbated by Micron's selection of New York, of central New York. Also challenges that are very real in downstate and other places, but we don't often think about, upstate New York being like this hotbed of like a housing crisis, but we've reached a point where in fact it is, and that problem has the potential to get significantly worse if we don't build a lot more housing. One of the things the governor announced when she was in town on Monday was a $10 million down payment on the execution of phase 1 of Blueprint 15, which, as you all know, is the significant revisioning of the public housing system that's managed by SHA. And that first phase will replace some of the existing dilapidated housing stock that SHA is currently managing in sort of subpar conditions. But that first phase will also include market rate housing mixed in with affordable, so that we don't recreate some of the densification of affordable housing challenges that certainly was more common practice in the in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on and so forth. So we're doing our best to try to be intentional about it. There is no single solution to the housing challenges that this will create. Fast-growing communities have housing problems, and if we aren't thoughtful and intentional, we will suffer that same fate. I believe in our ability to be thoughtful and intentional and to navigate through that and manage it as best we can. But we also need to acknowledge that as a rapid growth community, we are going to see home price escalation. And that's going to be in our future for the foreseeable future. That's not a bad thing. That's actually a positive thing. It creates wealth for people in our community. It doesn't create wealth for all people in our community, and that's what we need to be conscious of.
Okay. Related to that, people are asking questions about towns implementing good housing planning practices rather than just sprawl, building efficient and fully electrified housing stock, rather than having to worry about retrofitting things later on, or things like that. Well, some of that is going to be up to the individual municipalities, with their own zoning and so forth.
New York's a home rule state. New York's a home rule state. So as many of you know, from CenterState's perspective, we have tried for 15 years to drive towards an enforceable regional land use plan. We worked with County Executive Mahoney to craft one. The legislature did not support it. We tried through the consensus government modernization process to unify the planning and zoning functions of all 36 municipalities in Onondaga County, and unfortunately we failed miserably. We did that because of the fact that rapidly growing communities, which was our aspiration and ambition, need high quality coordinated planning and zoning to avoid sprawl. And even back then, we had a vision for a region that would be growing faster than it was. I am personally disappointed that we were not able to put some of those regional land use planning efforts into place prior to landing Micron. I think we would have been better served had we done that. Hindsight is 2020. We have to work with the system we have. The reality is that, and I'm really proud of him, this is not necessarily an easy thing to say, but the county executive has said, and we have said, housing and community amenities, and even some of the industrial development that takes place associated with Micron needs to happen where we have existing infrastructure first, right? We should not be building new water and sewer infrastructure just to accommodate and unlock new acreage in real estate in and around our community, whether it's in Onondaga County or surrounding counties. We have excess capacity in those systems today that we should use. It's a more efficient use of the investment of taxpayer dollars that's already been had. It prevents the massive amount of sprawl of urbanized land that we saw from, 1970 to 2000, the amount of urbanized land doubled in Onondaga County, and our population didn't grow by a single person.
Right.
We can't do that with Micron and population growth and not end up like Phoenix and Tucson, which is like my worst nightmare. I don't want that for this community. I don't think anybody wants that for this community. So building first where infrastructure exists, absolutely unequivocally a priority. And I know that the state is working through their housing compact, a number of incentives that would drive not only the creation of that housing, but incentivize projects that are built with existing infrastructure, incentivize projects that are built on transit lanes, so TOD, also something that we've been pushing really hard for. And clearly the state has pretty aggressive goals on home electrification as well.
Very good. You mentioned trying to identify the things that could break, and Christina is asking, how about schools and hospitals? Are they on the list? Are they things that are being looked at?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, school systems, yes. It's interesting. Our physical plans for our school districts, and this isn't universally true across the entire region, right? So, but our physical plans for our schools are typically they were built for larger populations because we saw larger declines. They may not be modernized, but many of those districts do have some facilities that could be modernized, renovated. Anytime you're talking about adding 125,000 or more people to your community, there are going to need to be new investments in schools and improvements. I think the healthcare system is one I really do worry about. So is it part of the conversation? Yes. Do we have solutions in place today? No. And as you all know, our healthcare system not only in Central New York, but across the state and frankly around the country is in crisis right now as a result of COVID and staffing shortages. It's a massive, massive problem. Good news is partners are engaged. We're talking to the hospital systems. We're talking to the doctors. We're talking to the state. We're looking for solutions, but no surprise. All of our community amenities and infrastructures need to scale along with the growth that Micron's going to bring. Our arts and cultural institutions could fall into the same category. Our park systems are going to fall into the same category. I mean, you can go out on Dogger Lake Park on a sunny afternoon in April, and it's packed. And imagine how packed it would be with 125,000 more people in our metro, unless we're building new parks and new amenities to disperse that impact. So I think at every point of our social and civic infrastructure, we are going to need to make investments and build capacity on a parallel path so that we don't end up hitting pain points. We won't do it perfectly. No community ever has, and no community probably ever will. But the more intentional we can be on the front end, I think the better a job we can do at minimizing those impacts. At least that's my hope and my expectation.
Very good. At least one person's asking whether or not libraries can be considered a part of that. Is the library system expected to be part of the that whole impact?
Yeah, I will say, excuse me, it hasn't. Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm. We've given your vocal cords a workout here today. Sorry.
It hasn't come up in any of the conversations I've been in yet. I see a couple of library representatives here on the call, but of course, I put it in that same category of infrastructure that's going to need to scale, and happy to chat about that with either one of you offline.
Super. Looking ahead, Bob Haley is asking about some of the cultural challenges ahead, both urban and suburban, for planning equitable housing, transportation. You talked about some of that, and the diversity of some of the villages and so forth. And in particular, he's asking about whether or not you think some of the vacant housing stock in Central New York, both in the city and in the villages and rural areas, is a potential resource for sustainable neighborhood revitalization.
Yeah, I am. This is the thing that there are many things that I'm going to be paying attention to, but I will tell you just on a personal level, I am passionate about the fact that this investment is a once in a lifetime opportunity to rebuild and revitalize the housing stock, and as a result, the neighborhoods and the school systems in the city for sure, in our inner ring suburbs also. It's a huge challenge. The economics are challenging, but we now have an economic driver that can enable us to solve that problem in a way that we haven't had up to this point in Central New York. So I talk to the mayor about it every chance I get, talk to the county exec about it, talk to the state about it, and the governor about it. Yes, we will need to build new housing. we'll need to build a lot of new housing. We'll need to build luxury housing and market rate housing and workforce housing and affordable housing. But if we do not seize this opportunity to put what is left of our usable urban and suburban housing stock in a better place, I think we will have failed. It failed on one dimension, at least, in terms of our ability to maximize the long-term community, social, and economic impact of an investment like Micron. You go to fast-growing communities in other parts of the country. I've had the privilege to tour many of them, and neighborhoods are vibrant and people are moving back and they're renovating homes and there are programs. The good news is here in Syracuse we have tools like the Syracuse Onondaga County Land Bank that can be great partners in helping to improve some of that transformation. So we've laid some of the foundational building blocks to make this a little bit easier than it might otherwise have been. But in some respects, it is still a block by block, home by home approach that is required, and that's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take a commitment to not just doing the easy thing, which is building the 400 unit, multi-family residential projects in our suburbs, and really looking at our city and suburban neighborhoods as choice neighborhoods for people to live in the future.
Very good. It's all ongoing significant issues, but glad to see they're getting your focus and attention. That's great. But let's look to the future. You've mentioned the community investment fund and so forth, and you mentioned the seeker process, some folks, the environmental review process. Well, I guess first, what's the timeline on the environmental review? What does that look like?
Again, a question better answered by the county that is leading that effort. I certainly don't want to step on their toes by saying the wrong thing. But generally speaking, timeline 2023 is site work and permitting. So seeker EIS process, NEPA process, air permits, wetlands, et cetera, such as is necessary. Grubbing the site, getting it ready for construction, some of the utility infrastructure and wastewater, sewer work that needs to be done, followed by in earnest construction. We believe in April of 2024 is the current construction schedule. It's about a 30-month build from the time they start. That can change a little bit. It can accelerate, it could slow down depending on availability of labor and trades and materials and a number of other factors. But I think it is safe to anticipate that that first fab is coming online the end of 2026, beginning of 2027, which is when you see the first significant permanent hiring by Micron, probably the second half of 2025. What some people may not be aware of is that the construction opportunity here for this project is just as significant. Construction in upstate New York in my 20 professional years up here has been a transient thing, right? Projects happen, they get built, and there isn't always construction behind it to serve as a full-time pipeline of employment for people, especially through the winter months. Once Micron starts building, they won't stop. To put it in perspective, each of their fabs are about $22 billion over 30 months. So they will spend about $850,000 an hour building those fabs. It's just it's a crazy number. They will have 5,000 construction workers on site at any given time, and that employment is near permanent because as soon as they finish the first fab, they're going to start the shell and the site work and the prep for the second fab, and then the third, and then the fourth, and that's remarkable. It really does offer an opportunity for our trades to completely change the dynamic for their members, and to give people an opportunity who choose to go into the trades, who work on the project labor agreement, who would work for building the fabs out there. You could have someone who starts working on a construction project out there when they're 20, either out of high school and college, and they could still be working there 40 years or 20 years later. It's just remarkable to think about that. And those jobs themselves come with a massive economic impact. It also comes with additional pressures on housing, additional pressures on our hotel rooms, which are already relatively limited and at capacity here in Onondaga County. And so I think you're going to see temporary housing. I think you're going to see more hotels that are being built. There's going to be a lot of that development that's going to be taking place as well.
Outstanding. Well, this is good news for all of us. In fact, Chris Carrick even commented that he has a son that's going to move back to Syracuse because of what's going on, and maybe he'll get some of those jobs that'll last 20 years or longer. That's wonderful. The other folks are asking, how can they get involved? How can they access the Community Investment Fund? What's the process? Or are there forums or places where people can volunteer to be part of the conversation on things that they care about? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so this won't be a totally satisfactory answer, but stay tuned. In the very near future, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes, that'll be making announcements before too long, but in the very near future, there'll be more information about the community engagement process and the community investment framework and fund. And so I would beg people's indulgence and patience. This is actually really important. It's important for us to get it right, and a lot of time and energy is going into trying to craft something that will actually be meaningful for our community going forward. In the meantime, those who might have additional questions or who are chomping at the bit to make a connection or something, feel free. You can put my email in the chat, rsimpson@CenterStateCEO.com. I'll be happy to respond personally and try to plug people in as best I can wherever I can.
Outstanding. We've gotten a lot of comments thanking you for your time already. Rob, I'm just putting your email in there. But I'd like to add my thanks to you for that. This has clearly been a lot of work by a lot of different people. And like I said before, it's always good to have a good news story. But it sort of reminds me.
The one thing I just want to share as we close is that, and I think this is maybe one of the from a community psychological standpoint. I think it's really important that we embrace this moment to turn a corner as a community and to embrace the opportunity that we have. Of course, this will create some points of tension and challenge and concern, and we should be aggressive about making sure that we're having these conversations around housing and environmental sustainability as a community. But let's go back to where Peter started in this introduction. The Micron executives, one of the most sophisticated technology companies and manufacturing companies in the world, did the most comprehensive site selection of probably any company in the history of our planet. And they finished that process not only by choosing Syracuse, but telling the world that our community was the place that offered them the best end-to-end life cycle solution for their workforce, for their employees, for their environmental sustainability, for their water. And this is something we should be immensely proud of. And it's something that we should use to offset all of the many years and decades of feeling put upon by forces of globalization and others that pulled jobs and people out of our community and sent them elsewhere, our kids and our grandkids and our parents and so on and so forth. We need to turn the page and think about the future for Central New York in a context that is very different from what we've spent the last 15 or 20 years doing as a community, which has been bootstrapping ourselves to a point where we could be competitive again. And now we're not only competitive again, but we've taken a leap sort of 3 steps forward to a point where we are now at the global edge of advanced manufacturing and technology. That's the Syracuse experiment today. And I really encourage all of you to think about that, to embrace that, and to lean into that. Yes, as advocates and as stewards for the issues that you care about, but with a forward-looking and optimistic mindset about what the future can hold. Because for too long, this region has been forgotten and ignored and had to suffer some of the indignities associated with economic, social, and demographic decline. And that is not our future anymore. And it's hard, to wake up one day and read a story in the paper about some, company named Micron that maybe you never heard of, and to really believe that this is happening. But as someone who is in conversation with the company every day, 5 times a day, this is happening. There's no scenario where this project doesn't happen. They're not backing out. The global demand for memory and data is not shrinking. It's growing exponentially, which is why they're building these fabs. And they've picked us. And we are now tied at the hip with this company and what that means. And so I really appreciate all of you inviting me to speak today. I'm really, as you can tell, excited about this project and what it means, and looking forward to working with all of you on all these many challenges and opportunities we've discussed here today.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. John,
Thank you
I'll
all.
turn it over to you to close us up.
Yeah, and I want to offer my thanks also to Rob for your frank and insightful and wide-ranging answers, and your grasp of the project, and helping to bring us up to speed with you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Appreciate the effort that Peter put into this to make this a successful program. So thank you, Peter, and thanks to our audience for being here today. And I look forward to perhaps some future programs, right? There's a lot that we only scratch the surface on, especially all these planning issues that we're going to be faced with. The Board of Green USA looks forward to bringing to you other programs to share the continuing process as we go forward here. And thanks to all the attendees that were here with us today, and we'll see you next month. Circle March 10th, I believe, on your planner, and look forward to getting that information from us in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
day, everyone.
Enjoy.